In June 1998, 11-year-old Burke Ramsey spoke once again with an investigator. The videotape was kept secret for 18 years.
Now, if the Ramseys were innocent, if the Ramseys are innocent, why keep Burke Ramsey's, this video of him, a secret for 18 years? Surely, if it was something that made them look good and if it made them appear innocent, then why not release it? But then I guess the converse is also true, isn't it?
And only came to light this week.
What's the first thing you remember hearing that night?
Mom saying it's just from the light, then it's sure I remember them telling me about the house.
And what did you do next?
Laid in bed with my eyes closed, trying to get to sleep.
Next, Burke said his dad came in and turned off the lights, but did not notice that Burke was awake.
I was afraid that something was bad.
And then he chuckles. Now, was he afraid that something bad happened that someone else did, or was he afraid that something bad had happened that he had done? And it may be an unfair question to ask, but if someone has been killed in your home and you are in that home and she was killed almost in a room next to you, wouldn't you be traumatized by that? Wouldn't you feel bad for not only your sibling, but in a way for your whole family, that you've been targeted and hurt by this attack? And I can tell you, I've actually had that same experience regarding criminal activity, and there's nothing funny about it.
So Burke said he never left his bedroom.
Even for a little bit, just to see what was happening.
No.
He said he could hear his parents in the kitchen area.
He was like, okay, calm down. And we can call the police. Let's call the police.
You could hear that quite clearly from your room.
Pretty clearly.
Did you ever have a desire to go find out what was going on?
Yes. I figured that I didn't really interrupt.
Do you notice how slowly Burke is speaking and seems to be choosing his words very carefully as well?
Contradicted the detective's belief that Burke can be heard in the 911 call. Burke said he didn't find out what had happened to John Benet until that night, after he'd been taken to a friend's house.
I thought John May didn't be there. I thought they found her. So I came in real excited, almost relieved. And I saw him was sad inside. And my dad told me that John May was.
He said he sobbed.
If you look carefully when Burke says this, he's sort of fiddling with something and he kind of looks up sheepishly with a little smile, talking about John Benet being in heaven.
You think John Benet was killed?
I have no idea.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Now, it's easy to watch the interview with Burke and imagine that it was
so easy, so simple,
when the reality is that it was anything but. And if you were just a researcher wanting to tell this story, well, it took 18 years for this video to resurface. In fact, of the three Ramseys that were in the house that night, one was far harder to speak to than the other two. John and Patsy gave extensive interviews in late April 1997 when Burke did not. And remember, John and Patsy were also both in the house during the kidnapping phase for 7 hours when Burke was not. And remember, John and Patsy both gave many, many interviews to the media when Burke did not.
Another scenario, Patsy, that you flew into a rage over Jean Benet's bedwetting.
there again, what are your priorities? JonBenet would have an occasional accident. It was nothing to be alarmed at. I didn't care one way or the other. I would not have ever. It's just ludicrous. You can't even answer it.
Hey, the Ramseys.
There are lots of pieces of handwriting that we have of other suspects that match much more closely than mine does.
We had been looked at by national experts in handwriting, and they told us the same thing. They said it's a very low probability of comparison that Patsy's writing compares. Very low probability that she would have been the writer.
And so I guess the bottom line is, how credible is Burke during these interviews? And one thing that's a very interesting backstory is the job that it was involved in simply being allowed to speak to Burke way back in 1998, and when that happened. And all of that seemed to be on condition that no one from Boulder PD had any say in the matter, and it seemed to be on condition that no one from Boulder PD be allowed to question him. Detective Dan Schuller represented the district attorney's office. Have a look at this article from the Daily Camera, which kind of came out at the time. In February, after several weeks of negotiating another interview with his client, that's Burke Ramsey, Jim Jenkins, that's Burke Ramsey's lawyer, broke off talks with police and accused detectives of leaking the substance of negotiations to a Denver newspaper. So the lawyer didn't really like the fact that the negotiations, the conditions, all of this was being told to the media, and then just simply wouldn't allow his client to be interviewed. And that, I guess, provided a convenient excuse to delay that whole process. Jenkins on Thursday said that he received a phone call from Peter Hofstrom, the district attorney's chief trial deputy, shortly after police handed over the Ramsey case to prosecutors on June 2nd. Burke's parents were anxious for him to cooperate and participate in the investigation, Jenkins said. Do you think that that's true, that Burke's parents wanted him to participate in the investigation? They were anxious for him to cooperate, meaning they were almost like pushing Burke, let's have you speak to them as soon as possible. Do you think that that is what that statement is actually referring to? And if it is, do you think that that is likely? I mean, on the one hand, if you say, we're very anxious that Burke speaks to investigators, well, look at the date when that literally happened. In other words, actions speak louder than words. Then the article goes on to note the attorney called Schuller's questions complete and very thoughtful. And so they actually really liked Dan Schuller. The attorney liked Dan Schuller. They were happy with that whole questioning. But then, again, why wouldn't you release those questions and answers for 18 years? And they still haven't been released in total. Just snippets of it has been released. Neither Schuller, Broomfield's interview specialist, nor Hofstrom could be reached at the time for comment Thursday when the Daily Camera reached out to them. And then at the same time, there was a prepared statement from the district attorney's office, so they also weren't spontaneously responding to statements. And this is once again where we try to not look at the trees, but look at the woods and say, what are we seeing in the situation? Is Burke allowed to say whatever he wants when Burke is asked a question? Does he seem to answer the questions in a way that raises suspicion or reinforces a sense of credibility and believability? Is the release of these statements, I would like to know how come they were released. I don't really know the answer. I don't know if it was a Freedom of Information Act scenario. But certainly the secrecy around these tapes on the one hand, and secondly the difficulty in simply getting the interview to take place. Does that suggest something one way or the other? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. For now, I'm not going to take it further than that. I do want to go back to Pineapplegate and just discuss that aspect. Just digging a little bit deeper into Burke as an important witness. Before I go, I want to conclude by quoting a message from someone on Patreon who wrote, "Just absolutely binging your material, read the 9 Two-Face books through Kindle, for 2 straight weeks, and now onto the John Bonet case. Became a $10 subscriber. That's on Patreon. That's the tier with the longer audiobooks, but have been following you for years. Your coverage of the Watts is easily the best out there. Thank you for all you do. Big supporter from Denver. And then there's this review from Melissa Goldstein, a 5-star review titled Very Insightful, like all the other TCRS books and videos. It was left on January 18th, the day before my birthday. She says, admittedly, I write this review in part, as Nick said he'd give a shout out if I did. Melissa writes, with the re-emergence of media attention and the Netflix thing, I finally got curious about the John Bonet Ramsey case 28 years later. And now, as they say, I'm down the rabbit hole big time. Nick is an amazing storyteller who writes beautifully and uses metaphors and poetry to powerfully make his points clear and impactful. In my opinion, the most powerful metaphor was that of pageantry. It's quite a long review, so I'm not going to read all of it, but thank you very much, Melissa, for that review. And if you guys are out there reading Christmas Star, keep it coming. I'll put a link to the audiobook and the Kindle book and the paperback in the description. Thank you for listening. Look out for the next analysis on Pineapple Gate, and I'll see you guys next time.